Hello everybody, my name is Joshua and I'd like to welcome you back to another episode of Coffee, Cats, and King, where we will discuss books, both new and old. I will share with you pictures of my cats, will make you wish they were your cats, and I will drink enough coffee for me and everybody watching. The mug today says, "Meet me at Central Perk." So of course any Friends fans out there should get that. My shirt, some of my Sublime shirts. And I'm back yet again with a wrap-up video for the month. April, it's funny, I felt like I barely read anything during April because I kind of got into this bad habit of reading a bunch of books at once, and I had gotten out of that so I could focus on one or two at a time, you know. But now I'm back where I think currently I'm reading 8 books all at one time, which is a horrible idea. Don't do it. But at the same time, I guess somehow it worked for me because I read 18 books last month, which doesn't even make sense to me. I really don't feel like I did, but somehow I don't know. So obviously I'm not going to take a massive amount of time talking about each of these books. Some of them I plan to do separate reviews for anyway, but let's go on and jump into it. Very first book I read for the month of April was Alfred Hitchcock Presents Skeleton Crew. And I love these old collections. They have just the coolest covers. They're always very solid collections, whether you like the man or not. And this one was no exception. Exactly what I needed to start the month off. Very first story in here is one of my absolute favorites of all time. That is It's a Good Life by Jerome, Bixby. And from there, the rest of the collection did not disappoint at all. I love this one. I love the cover. 5 stars. It is definitely going to stay with me. Now, the next one came from my lovely mother. She knows that I want to start incorporating more poetry into my reading, and so she picked up Samuel Coleridge's Rime on the Ancient Mariner and other poems. And this was a 3.5 star for me. Some of Coleridge's poetry just doesn't work for me, but that's okay. Most people know Rime on the Ancient Mariner. It's not my favorite actually, but this collection does have one standout in my opinion, and that is Christabel. If you're going to read any of his work, I'd suggest Christabel overall. It's always been my favorite from Coleridge, but yeah, 3.5 stars. It was a decent collection. Now the next book is Lindsay Maracata with Hide and Seek. And of course I gotta show off the step back cover. This was a fairly interesting little thriller, if you will, where children are being kidnapped and no one seems to know what to do about it. In addition to this, there is this old historical building that is set to be torn down, and the company that's doing it is basically going against all regulations. They just don't care. They're going to get it done one way or another, no matter what it costs them in fines and fees. And everyone in this book is very unscrupulous. They're all just bad people, and I feel like the woman doing the kidnappings, it's pretty obvious. If any of these people would just get out of their own ways and pay attention to what's going on around them, then maybe what happens could have been prevented. But overall, it's a fairly decent read. I didn't know what to expect, but I had a good time with it. I give it 3.5 stars, and it's one that I would suggest picking up if you want a quick, interesting little thriller. The first audiobook that I finished for the month was Wastelands, Stories of the Apocalypse. This is another reread for me. As I said, I now have a very long commute back and forth because we live out in the middle of nowhere. Which is fine because I can listen to audiobooks. The bad part is I cannot buy books, and I'm including audiobooks, so I'm rereading a bunch of my old audiobooks. So this is a reread. It was another 4 stars for me. It's a fun collection. Some of the stories don't quite do it, but there are some very entertaining ones in there. And the audio portion is very well done. So this is one that I would recommend to people if you're looking to pick up an audiobook collection. 4 stars. Had a good time with it. One that I did not enjoy as much is C.S. Johnson's Across the Floors of Silent Seas. And it had an interesting premise. This is about a man that is essentially kidnapped by mermaids. Interesting idea going in. The author, I think, needs work in her prose. She's very stilted and unnatural. There is some promise there with a few very pretty lines and interesting premise. But overall, I just don't think she's there yet as an author. So this was a 2-star read for me. There's potential. Maybe I'll check her out in the future and see if she has improved her craft. Now, I have not read one of these creepover books in a while, so I did go on and pick up the next one. This is Together Forever. And this one is about a girls' camp, girls' summer camp, if you will. And this particular girl, she kind of breaks off from the group, goes out in the woods, finds this old cabin, and there's a very attractive boy there who immediately takes an interest to her, and the story goes from there. This is a pretty classic setup, almost, and I very much enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot better than a couple of the other creepover books. Definitely not the best, though, but it was 4 stars overall. And has a bit of an interesting twist, a little more than I thought it was going to anyway. So 4 stars overall. Definitely not the best creepover that I've read so far, but far from the worst, and still worth picking up if you're interested in these books. Alright, following that, I got into some serious adult fiction with T.E.D. Klein's Dark Gods. Thank you again, Troy. I'm very glad I got to read this. So this is a collection of 4 short stories / novellas, and very Lovecraftian at times. And I don't know if that is the norm for T.E.D. Klein, but I do have his other book, The Ceremonies, over there on the shelf somewhere. So I plan to get to that soon. I'll see. But overall, his writing is just immensely enjoyable. Like I said, there is sort of a Lovecraft undercurrent to it. He's very good at setting that unsettling atmosphere and just letting it sit there and not, pushing you from horror to horror to horror. He just lets you sit in that sort of uncomfortable space that he's created and let you stew for a while. Let you come up with some horrors of your own in your mind, and then eventually that slow reveal comes around. And the payoff, in the case of these 4 stories anyway, was well worth it. So 5 stars for me from this collection. I'm very excited to read more by this man, and I would highly suggest it to others that have not read it. Alright, now this next one, I struggled a bit in regards to how I wanted to rate it. This is Nathan Allen's Horror Show, and this was an interesting read. This is about a man that comes back to town for his sister's wedding, and immediately death starts to take over the town. People are dying in awful, horrific ways. The police are totally incompetent, and everyone else is almost turning a blind eye to it. So this is a setup that we have seen 10,000 times before. However, it is meant to be that way because at a certain point in the book, you will get to a twist where this all makes sense, and some of the silliness and ridiculously of the story really starts to make sense. It's not just Nathan Allen not knowing how to write. He actually does it in a pretty decent way. So I did have some issue with it. I had to roll my eyes a couple times here and there, but at the same time, you're sort of meant to. Again, if you read the book, you'll understand. But I think at the end of the day, I decided to give this about a 3.5, 4 stars. Some of the particulars of the book were very well done, but I did have some issues with the writing in a couple places. So if you're looking for sort of a metaphysical, humorous horror, then this may be one for you. On to my second poetry collection of the month. I read Strange Poetic by Poetic Q. I got this for free off Amazon. Figured, what the heck, I'll give it a shot. I'm not going to delve into it. It wasn't really for me. The poetry just, I thought was very amateurish and did not work. It was 2 stars. There you go. This next one was definitely not 2 stars. This is Rod Serling's Other Worlds. And I'm just going to tell you, anytime that the name Rod Serling ends up on a book, it's probably going to end up being a 5-star read for me. So they actually brand this fantasy on the side, which is funny because it's very clearly almost exclusively science fiction. But there's some excellent stuff in here. Actually, one of my favorite science fiction stories is the very first one in this collection. That is They by Mr. Robert Heinlein. And this is kind of the... I'll just say it's kind of the precursor to The Truman Show. And I'll leave it at that. But overall, the stories in this collection are of a very high caliber. Very much enjoyed it. Very varied. Very varied. Horrible to say. Pardon that. But yeah, very varied. And just an excellent, excellent collection. If you're at all interested in science fiction, pick this one up. It's got some great stuff in here, 5 stars every time, and I will definitely be reading it again in the future. This next one was another weird read for me, but I figured, hey, it's free, I'll give it a try. This is Blue Sprule's Taro, legendary boy hero of Japan. This ended up being 3.5 stars for me. I said, not my normal read whatsoever, but this one has all of the makings of a classical Japanese, almost historical story, but at the same time it delves into the realm of fantasy and Japanese mythology. Also has a very Rudyard Kipling kind of Tarzan feel to it, if you will, about a boy who grows up in the woods with animals, ends up being brought back into society, and interesting read. The writing was a bit simplistic in ways, and I don't know if it was meant to be that way, again, because this is not my typical kind of read, but overall I got some decent enjoyment out of it. I'd say I'd give it 3.5 stars, and if that's your kind of thing, then this might be a good one for you. This is another one that that really surprised me. I didn't know what to expect going in, but this is Thomas Page with The Man Who Would Not Die. And it's kind of billed as a medical thriller. Yeah, it says a medical thriller of supernatural terror. And I didn't really know what that meant, but it's pretty darn accurate. So this is about this man who works for a company that creates this tube thing that you see on the cover here. And this is basically a new life support system. So when someone is in critical condition, they toss them in this tube, and the tube does everything to keep them alive and to fix things in their body that the doctors don't even know are wrong. Well, without giving anything away, someone is put into this thing that shouldn't have been in there purposefully, and kind of becomes an experiment to see how long he can be kept alive. Well, he technically, clinically dies in there, and when he does, his spirit comes out and it can't get back in, so it starts haunting people. And so it really becomes a ghost story from there, and it was just a very unique read. It was not a perfect read. There are definitely some issues, but I can't say that I've read much like it, and it kept my interest throughout. So this one was 4.5 stars. I would definitely recommend it if you want something a little different in the realm of ghost stories. Pick this one up if you can find it on eBay or, you know, used bookstore or whatever. Very interesting. Just stick with it. It gets better as you go along, although the ending is not quite what I hoped for, but it still works. Alright, following that, I got into another Kindle collection. This is an anthology titled Through a Tangled Wood. And this is, yet again, more twisted fairy tales. And you guys know I love my twisted fairy tales. There's another collection on here that you'll see soon of that. But most of these stories are set in a more modern time, which doesn't always work as well for me. In this case, it was kind of the same. Some of them were kind of duds. But overall, the collection was actually pretty enjoyable. I gave it 4 stars at the end of the day. It is one that you can pick up for fairly cheap on Kindle if you want to read it on the side. And I'd say I'd recommend this one to fans of twisted fairy tales. Now, the only other audiobook that I listened to this month is my absolute favorite audiobook that I've listened to date, and one of my favorite books. This is Shadow Show, All New Stories in Celebration of Ray Bradbury. And I can't say enough good things about this book. This is just, well, it's just that it's such a love letter to Ray. And this book was put out before he passed away. So I can imagine the tears that brought to his eyes, because he was always a very passionate man. As with, I'm sure, anyone else watching this video, I am an immense Ray Bradbury fan. I mean, he is one of the most influential and greatest writers, period. And that is another point that I will fight you on physically. And I'm trained in martial arts, you will lose. So just keep that in mind. But but seriously, if I'm going to suggest any audiobook to anyone, it is this one. This is just such a beautiful collection. All the stories are so wonderful, very Bradbury-esque. And everyone gets in there and doesn't just talk about the stories, they talk about the relationships with Ray, what he did to turn them into the writers they are, because all of them were influenced. I mean, I'd say any writer within his time period was influenced in some way by Ray Bradbury, and this collection really goes towards showing that. It's just a beautiful collection all around. I'd suggest it in physical copy and absolutely suggest it in an audiobook. 5 stars every time I listen to it, and it's just so great. So great, guys. Give it a read or give it a listen. I said that there was another collection of fairy tales on here. This is Angela Carter's The Bloody Chamber. And again, we have to appreciate how friggin' beautiful this book is. It's just astounding. It shows up on camera even better. And this is my first time reading Angela Carter, so it was very enjoyable. I will say right off that I don't think Angela Carter is for everyone. She wrote, based on this anyway, in a way that is... It's almost more akin to reading poetry than it is just reading regular prose. And I'm going to say it's not for everyone because you can't just, quickly read through as you would a silly, stupid horror. You can't read through as you would even just a classic fairy tale. There's depth to these stories. But more than anything, like I said, there's a poetry, there's a sexual repression and sexual reprieve. There's blood and violence and a host of other things. But again, I can't suggest it to everyone. It's just, for some people, it's not going to work at all. They're not going to be able to really just let themselves fall into her writing style. but for me, it was 5 stars. It was a very beautiful read. And although short, very challenging in ways. So I appreciated that quite a bit. I don't know what else is out there by Angela Carter, but I do plan to check it out and see. Now this next one I'm really not going to talk much about because I plan to do a video on this. This is probably the hidden gem that I found in the last couple of months. This is Francis Rickett with The Prowler. 5 stars. I'll be talking about this one in a video coming up, so I'm not going to say anything right now. Alright, and to round the month off, I read 2 Goosebumps books. The first was Monster Blood 3. The Monster Blood books, I feel like for some they're fan favorites. For me, they just went on too long. So the first one was a neat idea, really enjoyed it. The second one, same thing. The third, it really starts going downhill. This was a 2-star for me. It is definitely not one of my favorites from Stein, but after that I jump into one that is very unique, and is one of the more enjoyable Stein in my opinion. That is, It Came From Beneath the Sink. And the title and cover pretty much show you all you need to know. These kids move into a house, they find a sponge under the sink, but it's not actually a sponge. It is a creature that starts giving them awful, terrible luck, and there's nothing that they can do about it. Again, it's a fast read, as all Goosebumps books are, but it's one of his more interesting premises, in my opinion, and has a sort of desperate feel to it, and the ending in particular is rather bleak in this regard, and I very much enjoyed it. It was 5 stars for me. It's one of the more enjoyable Goosebumps in my opinion. So that'll wrap it up for the month. 18 books. I was originally, before I started writing this list up, I said, okay, well, I didn't read much. I'm going to talk about those, and then I'll talk about the books that I'm reading currently, but that was before I realized how many I got through. So I'm going to end it here, throw some cat footage in, of course. Next one, I will be doing a review and talking about those many books that I'm in the middle of currently. So, thank you guys for joining me. As always, stay safe, drink great coffee, ask me any questions below. I'm always willing to answer. And that'll do it. Cheers.